What is up guys? Welcome back for another tutorial on how to mod Diablo 2 Resurrected. Now this guide builds off my previous videos, so if you haven't seen those, make sure to check them out. You can find links in the description below, and I'll also link relevant videos up here in the top corner. Today we're going to have a look at creating new items in Diablo 2 Resurrected. We're going to create a sword and some body armor. And then from these two items, we're going to create a new set. So this should cover adding new items into the game, like new weapons and armor, and then creating sets or uniques from those new items. So we're going to start in a new mod directory. So I have new items.mpq. That's the name of our mod, new items. And in it, we have our mod info and our folders with all the files we need already extracted. So again, if you want to know how we extracted our data files or why we're in a folder called something.mpq, check out my earlier videos. So having a look at our ModInfo.json, we can see we just have new items and new items as our name and save path. So we'll have our saves completely separated from the rest of our characters. If we didn't want them separated and instead wanted to use our normal save games, we could just put in ... there to go to the parent directory instead of some subdirectory for the mod. And this would let us use our normal offline characters, but we don't want that. We want to separate our characters out because we're adding new items to the game. So if we weren't playing with this mod, we'd have issues because those new items wouldn't exist. So we'll have a quick look at the files that we're modifying today. So we have our data global Excel directory, and that has all our text files like our armor, weapons, set items and sets, and treasure classes. Now treasure classes we don't actually need to modify, but we're doing that so we can drop the set items easily, so I can show you guys the actual mod working. And again, we'll just be using Quill rats for those drops. So we actually have the HD directory this time as well. And in here we have global UI items, and we have folders for armor and weapons. And in here we have sprite files. Now we also have these bitmaps, but those are just files that I created. These sprite files are what we'll be editing to change how the item looks in your inventory. And likewise for our sword, we have sprite files for that as well. Then under the HD directory, we also have the items directory, and we have a JSON file here, which we'll be adding our new items to. And then we also have armor and weapons directories for our new items. Now these have models and textures. At the moment, there's no way to edit model files. There is a way to edit texture files, but we won't actually be using any of those. I just have them extracted here so that we can see what we might edit in the future once the tools are available. For the moment, what will be important are these JSON files. And finally, we have the local directory with language and our strings. These are for the item names and the set names as well. So everything I'm talking about today, you can find that in my GitHub in the link in the description below. So please do check that out. And please do remember to like, comment, and subscribe. So that's a lot of stuff. Where do we start with all this? Well, we start with the Armor.txt. So we open this up in Excel, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to freeze the top and the side panes so that we still have the headers and we still have the name column. And now what I actually did for this video was I copied the chainmail entry. So just copy that and moved it right down to the bottom, pasted it at the end here. You can see noble armor. This is what we're actually modifying. So I just used chainmail as a basis for this new item. Now you can create the item completely from scratch, but that is a lot of extra work. So if we paste in the chainmail here, we can see some of the differences. So if we come along, we can see that I modified the minimum armor class and maximum armor class. I modified the speed, required strength, required dexterity, so nothing really surprising here. And in fact, as always, I recommend checking out the Diablo 2 data file guide. That's found in Cask View under Data Global Excel. And this has information on all the columns that you can modify in each of these files. So this is invaluable for modding. So back here, we've got our noble armor. We've changed the name of it, but the name isn't very important here. As we come along, we can see I've set the level to 1. Now that's because I want Quill rats to drop this item. We've changed the price, and here we have a code and a name string. So I've used NBA. This isn't used anywhere else for any other item. So I've used NBA for noble armor. And you can see here we have other alternate graphics, normal codes, uber codes, ultra codes, etc. I've just set them all to NBA. So that is our item code. That's what we're going to need to reference in other files. So we have some more information here. We have the inventory width and height, and now I've actually set it to 2x2 instead of 2x3. It just fit the graphic that I had a bit better. Now we don't change any of these other values. And then we come along here to where the merchants actually sell the items. So we can see here we set Charcy Min and Charcy Max to 1, so she'll always sell one of these armors. That's a quick, easy way for us to see that this mod is actually working. And we've also allowed her to sell a magic version of this armor, but just one at the max. You can see that Chainmail didn't actually have these set. It was only set for Farah in Act 2, but we don't want to wait that long. So the only other thing of note is that I set the upgrades for Nightmare and Hell to XXX. So there are no upgrades for this armor in Nightmare and Hell. Now, looking at the Weapons.txt, I did something similar. I copied a crystal sword for this, and I just renamed it Noble Sword. I took NBS for this item's code. So again, NBS wasn't taken by any other item. So we now have NBA and NBS. Again, there's not much here. I changed some of the damage. I made this item way too overpowered, but obviously this isn't meant to be a balanced gameplay mod. So we just edited all the fields here. We changed the level again to 1 because we want Quill rats to drop it. Again, we have NBS here for normal, uber and ultra codes. The width and height we left as 2x3, and again I didn't change any of the flippy inventory or unique or set inventory file values. And I don't think I changed any of the other columns here except for making Charcy sell the item again. So yet again we have a min and max of 1, so we should always see Charcy selling one of these items. And yet again I set the Nightmare and Hell upgrades to XXX. So now we've added the data of our armor and weapons into the game, but we haven't changed their names or what they look like or anything like that, so we have to reference them in some other files. So we start with the Items.json, and if we look at this file, we can see all the item codes here and the files that they reference. So remember, we're using the Chainmail and Crystal Sword. Those are the items we copied, so we can just copy the entries for those and add them at the bottom. And you can see that's pretty much what I did. So I have my item code here. If you remember, we're using NBA and NBS. We have our noble armor and noble sword. So again, these were previously Chainmail and Crystal Sword, and I just renamed them to match my armor and sword. And now you can see we have armor and sword here. If we go armor, we have noble_armor. And likewise, if we go weapons, sword, we have noble_sword. So again, they match in with these paths here. So in these directories, we now have another JSON file. And now I'm editing these JSON files with Visual Studio Code. You can use whatever tool you want. They're just text files, but JSON is a specific format. And again, to get these folders and files, I literally just used Cask View, copied out Chainmail here, Chainmail the folder, and just renamed them. And then I'm editing them to change some of the values in those files. So I renamed it from Chainmail to Noble Armor. Likewise here, all the files in it, all the texture files are renamed to match Noble Armor. And again, it's worth noting that when you extract these files, see the chainmail.json here, it's all compressed to a single string, You can just format them with whatever tool you're using, like Visual Studio Code, or simply an online JSON formatter. So if you Google JSON formatter, you'll find plenty of sites out there. Just copy and paste this in, format it, and then paste the result back into this file. And that's exactly what we've done with our noble Armor.json. So you can see here we're still using chainmail model, skeletons, etc. So a lot of these files we can't edit. We can edit textures, but I haven't for this tutorial. So there's no point in changing them because our noble armor or chestmail, they're going to be the exact same. Now I have actually changed the texture file location, but again, they're just copy and pastes of the chainmail textures. So there hasn't been any changes made. The only thing I changed was the name here under the unit definition, and pretty much everything else is identical to the chainmail except for the textures, but you do not need to change those. And again, this is very similar to the noble sword. So again, we started with the crystal sword. I changed a few more of the model files, but again, it's only the path that has changed and the name of the files. These are the exact same models as crystal sword. Again, I just changed the name of the unit definition. You don't need to change anything else. So that's great. We've changed our items.json, we've added our 2 new assets, we've extracted those from our data files using cask view. We just use crystal sword and chainmail and renamed the files, edited 1 or 2 strings in the JSON file, and that's it. That's all we need to do here. We now want to change the inventory sprites. So if we go into HD, Global, UI, Items, we've armor and weapons again, armor, and again, I just extracted the chainmail sprite and changed it. So I'll show you how to do that now. So we previously extracted the chainmail and chainmail low end sprites. Now I'm just going to use the chainmail for this example, but I did do both previously. And now I renamed that file to noble armor, as you can see here. These BMP files were just images that I found on the internet. I did not draw these, I am a terrible artist. And now we're going to use the sprite edit tool. Now there's a link to this in the description below, and all we want to do is open our existing sprites. So if we come into items, armor, we have chainmail here. And you can see here, this is the image of the chainmail in the game. We'll want to export this image. So we're exporting this image. I'm going to name it chainmail. We'll save that. And you can see here, we have a bitmap file. Now you'll want to edit this with whatever tool you prefer to edit image files with. I'm using GIMP. So you can see here, we have a 196 by 294 file. And if you remember, this is a 2x3 piece of armor, where we actually created a 2x2 piece of armor. So what we're going to do is resize the canvas. And once we've resized the canvas, we can get rid of everything in it, copy our new image, paste that in, center it, and save the file. So we'll overwrite that chainmail.bmp. And you can see here, we have our modified chainmail. We go back into sprite edit, import now, and we import that chainmail. And there we go, we can save over our chainmail.sprite, and that's our image updated. Now you'll repeat this for the low end sprite, which is just a smaller version of the regular sprite, and repeat it as well for your weapon, your sword. So you can see here we have another noble sword. We didn't resize this because if you remember, it's still 2x3, but these sprites are updated with these images. So brilliant, we now have 2 new items. We have new inventory graphics for those items. We have them renamed in the files, but we don't actually have names for them in the game. So we want to come to local, language, strings, and strings legacy. And we're going to want to edit these item names.json. So again, we open these up, they're just JSON files. We scroll to the end, and you can see the last item was at ID 22485. So we're just going to pick some ID that's way above that. So I picked 70,000, and that's where I'm starting my custom items from. So we just want some item ID that isn't used, and 70,000 is way beyond the used items. So even if more items are added in the future, they won't conflict with our new items. So you can see here we have a key, and we've set our key to NBA and NBS, so two new entries, 70,000 and 70,001. And we've just changed them all to Noble Armor for NBA. And remember, we have NBA here because that's the code we used in the Armor.txt, and it's also the code we used in the Items.json in the HD items directory. And we've just set the name to Noble Armor and Noble Sword for NBS. And then we also have some additional keys down here for our set. So this name of our set that we're going to use, it's the King's Allies, and I know I'm terrible at naming things, but that isn't the point. So we have the King's Allies, the King's Sword, and the King's Armor. And those are the names of our set items and the set in general. So our key is King's Allies, King's Sword, and King's Armor. So remember those for a few minutes from now. And now once we've done the strings, do remember to do the strings legacy. So this is when you flip back into the old graphics. This file is used instead. And you can see here, I've just copy and pasted in our Noble Armor, Noble Sword, King's Allies, King's Sword, King's Armor. So now we have our new sword and new armor. They should work in game, but we just want to add them as a set item now. So we're now going to look at the set items and sets.txt. So starting out with the sets.txt, we're going to add another row at the end. We have King's Allies here, and remember this is the key that we used in that strings file. So this links to the name of the set. And likewise, the name doesn't matter, just make the same as your index. We're setting 0 for the version, so it isn't an expansion item. These P codes, these are all for partial sets. We've only got 2 items, so we don't really care about partial sets. We're going to just come over to the F columns, and this is for the full set. When you have the full set, this is what will happen. And what we've done is we've added 2 to all skills, so you have a min and a max. We have lifesteal here between 10 and 15%. Resist all at 25%, and armor class per level. So now that we've got everything set up for our entire set, we need to actually add the items of that set. So remember, King's Allies here is the index. So we're now in the set items.txt. So what I've done is I've added 2 new entries here. We've added the King's Sword and the King's Armor. And remember, these again link to the strings JSON that we edited earlier. And these are both part of the King's Allies set, which was again the key we used for the index and the name in the set.txt. And the ID, again, we just chose some value that was higher than anything else. And in fact, I don't think the ID is actually used because this has an asterisk before the column name. So we set the item. We have the King's Sword is set to NBS, that is our Noble Sword. King's Armor set to NBA, that's our Noble Armor. The item name doesn't matter again here because it has an asterisk in front of it. Everything else, I pretty much just copied the rarity from other columns. We have 1 in the level and the required level. We want to be able to use this set, and we have 1 in the level because we want the Quill rat to drop it. And then we have 2 columns here for color transformations, and this isn't something we've seen yet. So again, if we come back to the Diablo 2 data file guide, we can see the columns here, and they actually give us a bunch of different color codes to use. So we're going to use crystal red and light red or dark red or something for the items. So you can see here crystal red for our character and inventory transforms, and light red on the King's Armor for those transforms. And again, we come over, we have a few different properties that we've added on these. So we want cold damage on our sword, and again, this damage cold, we can refer to the properties.txt to figure out what these parameters and actual properties do. So I know from that properties.txt that damage cold takes a parameter, and that parameter is the length of the cold. It's 25 frames per second, so this is 3 seconds of slow, and then 20 to 40 damage. And then we have deadly hit. On our armor, we have half freeze, resist cold. So nothing strange there. And that's it. That's all we need to do. So again, to make things easier, I'm going to edit the treasure class X file. And we're going to come down to the Quill rat. We're going to set his set items to 1024. We're going to put 2 picks. So that means he can drop 2 items. And 1024 guarantees us set items. They're both level 1 the set items, so they can drop from a Quill rat. And we're going to add in NBA and NBS, our noble armor and noble sword, to the Quill rat. So when we kill it, it should drop those 2 set items. Let's give this a shot. So again, we come down to game settings. We make sure we have added -mod, new items, -text. And again, if you don't know what this means, check out my other videos. And once we have those command line args set, we just play the game. And connecting to Battle.net is taking a while. I take it the servers are down again. Good thing our mods are for offline characters only. And here we are with our offline Sir Test-a-Lot. Okay, I'm sometimes good at naming. So if you remember, we added the noble sword and armor to Charcy. So if we open up her inventory, we should see, yep, we have a noble sword there, 3 sockets, that's pretty good. Armor, you can see the noble armor here, and she actually has one of the magic versions as well. And you can see it here, it seems to have all the stats that we have. It has a name, same with the noble sword. All our stats seem to have been taken into account. We can equip the items. If you remember, we changed the size of the armor, so chainmail was 2x3, this is 2x2, and that has taken effect. And you can see our character changes. Now it changes in the same way as equipping chainmail or crystal sword would, because we haven't actually changed the models. So that is something we can't do yet. But anyway, let's find a Quill rat and find our set items. Alright, here we go, couple of Quill rats. There we go, noble armor, noble sword, both set items, that is excellent. So we can see as we identify them, the color is actually changing. And that's the light red and the crystal red that we applied. And if we drop them on the ground, you can see there, it is red compared to our normal armor. So if we compare them side by side, you can see that is the light red applied to the armor. So that's the character transform. And when we equip it, you can see as well, it is changing the color of our armor. And likewise with the sword, although it's not as visible the change. But anyway, we can see on the armor, our king's allies, we have our armor and sword, everything's correctly named. We have our cold resist and our half freeze duration. And we also have our cold damage and deadly strike. And you can see here, we don't have any set bonus yet, but once we equip the item, there's our set bonus, there's our +2 to all skills, our life stolen, our defense based on character level, all resists, everything is there. Alright, I may be just slightly overpowered. So hopefully that shows you how you can add new items to the game and make those items into sets or uniques or something like that. So all these files are linked in my GitHub down below, so do check those out. I know I skipped over a lot, but it is pretty much just copying the existing chainmail and crystal sword and changing a few values. So if you enjoyed this guide, please do remember to like, comment and subscribe. It helps me out a ton and it lets me know that you guys want to see more of these guides. So that's all I have for you today, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.